Bastet, a short Overwatch story by Michael Chu. After days of lying in wait, Anna's target had appeared in one of Cairo's opulent ancient palaces. Abdul Hakim was a king in his own right, one who was using his power and influence to squeeze the life from the city, making himself and his followers rich in the process. But before she had her chances to capture him, the first ghost appeared, Jack Morrison. Though he was masked and had assumed the identity of the vigilante, Soldier 76, she recognized him immediately. The world believed that Morrison was dead, killed in the destruction of the Overwatch base in Switzerland, but Anna had her doubts. Though Jack had escaped death, a specter followed behind him. The Reaper, a killer clad in all black, his face hidden behind a bone-white mask. Reaper had confronted Jack, and Anna had leapt to his aid. She had subdued Reaper, wrestling him to the ground. But when she had stripped off the ghoulish mask and seen the ruin of a face beneath, she recognized Gabriel Reyes, a friend and a comrade she had known just as long as Jack. Gabriel proved to be the real Phantom, as he faded into thin air, disappearing like a whisper. She was left with the revelation that Gabriel and Jack, two men like brothers to her, were not dead. In fairness, they say I was, too. She took a deep breath and surveyed the scene. Bullet marks patterned the walls, tiles on the floor were cracked, and the bodies of the manor's security guards, muscle for Hakim's illegal enterprise, were splayed about like children's toys. At the heart of the courtyard, Jack stood impassively. "I got them all," Jack said as he rifled through one of the fallen mercenaries' belongings. A guard on the ground between them groaned, and in a flash, Anna drew her sidearm and fired a sleep dart into his neck. "You missed one," Anna said. Jack gave one of his good guy shrugs. "It's nice to see you too, Anna." Anna engaged the targeting visor from underneath her cowl. The heads-up display failed to activate. She flipped it back, annoyed. Any idea where they went? Jack activated his visor and scanned the area. Not a trace. Something to worry about later. "That doesn't look good," Anna said. Jack had been shot right beneath the giant numeral 76 on his jacket. As she took a closer look, she could see that the jacket and his flesh had been ripped apart by a shotgun blast. From that range it should have killed him, but Jack had certain advantages. His wounds could heal themselves, a legacy of his past as a test subject and enhanced soldier in the American Armed Forces. She could already see the pink of new skin forming at the edges, but not completely. Where it looked worse, his flesh had turned necrotic and black. "I'll be fine," Jack grunted. "It just takes us some time." Us, Anna thought. Jack was adapting quickly to the knowledge that his former best friend was still alive. Or did he already know? The faintest sound of approaching sirens interrupted her. "We should get going. Sounds like someone noticed." Jack nodded. "Lead the way." An hour later, Anna and Jack crouched in the shadows, watching as hover taxis zoomed by, and a pair of civilians riding robotic camels made their way down the street. Overhead, skiffs and surveillance drones crisscrossed the sky, the former carrying the well-to-do of the city to their afternoon appointments, the latter mobilized by the shootout in Hakim's palace. Anna navigated the narrow alleyways, finding the routes through the labyrinthian tangle of streets and pathways, keeping an eye out for the patrols that circled like hawks. For once in her life, she was grateful for the city's patchwork infrastructure, still recovering a decade after Overwatch's intervention. The state of Anna's home country was one of the reasons she had been drawn back to it. She felt responsible for Overwatch's legacy here, whether it had been her choice or not. In the shade of one of the massive derelict cooling towers, the heat from the oppressive afternoon sun was a little more tolerable. It didn't bother Anna, but Jack seemed to be laboring. His genetic enhancement should have helped him acclimatize to different conditions, the same way it should have stopped the blood that was seeping through his shirt he tied across his midsection as a bandage. "You should take better care of yourself," Anna chided him. "You sound like Angela," Jack grunted. Anna waited for the police car to speed by, lights flashing, and then she signaled him forward. "I think they're looking for us." Jack wiped the sweat from his forehead. Most likely, Anna said, squinting at the car's retreating form. But there's a lot of crime here. The police are busy. Another part of our legacy. Jack had fallen behind a few paces, leaning against one of the walls. Reminds me of Prague. I'm not carrying you this time, Anna said. Come on, Jack, keep up. She dashed out of the shadows and across the street, feeling the full blast of the sun above and the heat baked into the stones beneath her. Back in the shadows, she continued. Prague was your fault. Why you ever thought Reinhardt could be stealthy is beyond me. Anna waited for Jack to defend himself. When he didn't reply, she turned around. He had collapsed on the paving stone, out in the open. Not now, Anna thought as she ran back to him. She tried to pull him up. Wake up, Jack. But he gave no response. Anna slung Jack's arm over her shoulder and lifted him, carrying him down the alleyway. Jack drifted awake. That wasn't normal. Even before the army, he had always been a light sleeper, starting awake at the slightest disturbance. His eyes adjusted rapidly to the dim light of the room as he sat up. He was on an old military surplus cot with a threadbare blanket. His side ached like hell. Finally, Anna walked over, silently as a stalking cat. Tea? I'll take whiskey if you have it. Anna rolled her eyes. Yes, Jack, I happen to keep a bottle around just in case you show up. Tea's fine, Jack said in a smaller voice. Anna stretched her shoulders. You know, I had to carry you all the way here. I've been shot plenty of times. It's never felt like this. Jack grimaced as he shifted, twisting around to get a better look at the wound. 3 large gashes crisscrossed his back and sides, but they had been stitched together with a dark thread. There's something very wrong with that wound. We should probably take you to a doctor. Anna moved to a low table with an induction burner and placed an ornate gold kettle in one of its 2 heating pads. I don't think a doctor is going to know how to deal with this. Jack looked grim. Dr. Ziegler's not too far away, Anna suggested, but I'm not carrying you. No doctors, Jack said, and especially not Angela. How will we even begin to explain this to her? I doubt she wants to see us now. 2 lost ghosts. I tried stitching you up myself, Anna said apologetically. I was never much good with field dressing. Didn't need it very often. He ran his finger over the jagged stitches. Looks like a butcher went at it. Well, you can take care of yourself from now on, if you like. It's a little hard to reach, Jack said sheepishly. Then don't complain. Anna paused. And shouldn't that be healing itself? Jack nodded. It should be. Maybe the shells were laced with a biological agent. You sure you don't want to see Dr. Ziegler? We'd have to explain to her that we're not dead, Jack said. She's a miracle worker. She's probably used to it by now, Anna laughed. No Angela, Jack said, and that was that. He looked around at Anna's home, as it were. It was a mix of tactical equipment, military surplus, surveillance drones, and some light touches of domesticity. The space was more archaeological site than apartment. Ancient stone chambers with worn stone columns, and the walls had been carved with hieroglyphics, some that looked like the work of more modern vandals. On a low table, Anna had set up a little display of ancient objects that had been carefully preserved. A jar with a ram's head lid made of pale, milky stone, a black and gold mask bearing the visage of a fierce cat goddess, a chipped vase of brown-red clay, and a small, brilliant green figurine of a falcon. Jack took a close look at the antiquities. This place reminds me of a museum my mother took me to in New York when I was a kid. It had been one of his favorite parts of the trip, running around the transplanted ruins of an ancient Egyptian temple. He smiled at the memory. Anna offered him a blue mug with a red plaid pattern. It's a necropolis, a city of the dead. Appropriate, Jack chuckled as he motioned towards the small display. And what are these? I found them when I moved in. I couldn't very well throw them out. These relics survived thousands of years. Empires rose and fell, and they're still here. I figured that I should take care of them before I sent them to Dr. Faisal. Jack blew on his tea gently to cool it. You've been here the whole time? Ever since I left the hospital in Poland. Anna watched as Jack sipped his tea. He made a face at the bitterness. Any sugar? Anna ignored him. When I woke up, I didn't remember who I was. I had no name to give them, so they called me Janina Kowalski, or Jane Doe. For months, I sat in the hospital room in pain and confusion. Dr. Lee told me I was lucky. Well, as lucky as you can be after having glass and shrapnel embedded in your skull. Anna felt the phantom pain of her eye, even as she recounted the experience. "We tried to find you," Jack said somberly. "I used every resource at my disposal. Gabe even put McCree on it personally. Not a trace. Everyone else tried to convince me you were gone and that I was being irrational. But deep down I knew that you couldn't be dead. And I was right," Jack thought. "Dr. Lee kept me out of the system. I convinced her some dangerous people were after me." "I'm dangerous?" he asked, playing innocent. "You're a kitten, Jack." Anna laughed. "Eventually I was able to piece together what happened, but I don't know how much of it's real and how much I filled in the blanks myself. I remembered the mission. We were pinned down by the enemy sniper, and I was trying to flush them out. I remember lining up the shot, but it was almost like there was some reason why I didn't want to remember what happened next." Jack looked down at his teacup. "It was because I recognized that sniper," Anna said, studying him carefully. "You already know this." "Amelie," Jack said. Yes, he had learned that and more over the years, but he had left it unspoken. "Poor Gerard," Anna sighed. The pair sat in silence for a while as the steam drifted lazily from their cups and dissipated into the dusty haze of the ancient room. "Why are you here, Jack?" Anna asked at last. "I never forgave myself for leaving you behind. I heard about a bounty hunter in Cryo, and I hoped." Jack set the mug down. "You were never good at letting go," Anna chided him. "Too stubborn for your own good." "Gabriel is out there. Talon is getting more powerful. They need to be stopped. And everything that you've suffered, needs to be made good on. I'm going to tear them apart, piece by piece." Jack's impassioned words echoed off the stone walls, and he had clenched his fist. He slowly released them. "But I can't do it alone. I need your help." Anna crossed her arms. "You can barely stand. You fainted in the street. The only thing you need to do is recover. Don't let this go. Don't be like the others. They dismantled everything we spent our lives building, and they made us into villains." "We're not all like you, Jack," Anna said. "Some of us can move forward." "This is moving forward," Jack growled. "You're excited," Anna said. "You're not thinking straight. Get some rest. We can talk after." "After?" Jack's eyes flashed to his mug, and then he looked back to Anna. "Did you?" He collapsed on the cot. Anna waited until Jack was deeply asleep before she lifted his leg onto the bed, tucked a pillow beneath his head, and pulled the scratchy blanket over him. He had scars she didn't recognize, and his hair had thinned and faded to a silvery white. While he slept, Soldier 76 slipped away, and she could feel the presence of the Jack she remembered. She picked up the empty mug and left him to rest. Later, Anna returned to the darkened complex, her supplies in a canvas sack she carried over her shoulder. With the lights off, the place felt more like a tomb than ever. She walked through the entry corridor and into the main chamber to find, of all things, Jack, shirtless, doing one-handed push-ups through gritted teeth. He discarded his bandages in a small pile on his cot. Anna could see the angry red and black of the wounded flesh bound together by her inexpert stitching. "You're going to tear out those stitches," Anna remarked. "I was feeling a little restless," Jack explained. "You did sleep for 2 days," Anna said. "Hungry? I'd kill for a burger." Anna gave him a look of disbelief. "But I'm not picky." Jack flashed her that smile he used to try to get himself out of trouble. He really was like a child sometimes. Anna pulled paper containers of food out of her sack and placed them on a low table in front of him. The rich smell drifted through the air. There was falafel and beans, and pockets of freshly baked bread stuffed with steaming minced lamb meat and onions. "It's not my cooking, at least. Thank God for small miracles," Jack chuckled. In spite of herself, Anna laughed as well. Jack attacked the food like someone accustomed to having to wolf down meals quickly. Anna helped herself to a little, but mostly they ate in silence. When they had finished, Jack leaned back onto the crate he was sitting on and settled back into his questioning. "Why didn't you tell me you were alive?" Jack asked. "I don't know if you'd understand," Anna said. "Gabriel would. but you're different in some ways." Jack's expression was unreadable. "And Pharah? You let her think you were dead." "That was the hardest part," Anna sighed. She stood up and walked over to her desk, where there was a small framed photo of Anna with her young daughter on her back. Their arms were both spread wide as though they were flying. Pharah would have expected Captain Amari to return, but she was gone. The moment I hesitated, I changed. "You can't blame yourself," Jack said softly. "How could you have known?" "Don't patronize me, Jack," Anna snapped. "Of course it was my fault. It didn't have to halt me. It doesn't have to haunt me for the rest of my life, but It doesn't have to haunt me for the rest of my life, but I can accept the blame. It wouldn't have made a difference to us. We would have wanted you back. It turns out we couldn't do it without you," Jack said, touching her shoulder gently. "Overwatch needed you, and now I need you." Anna read the desperation on Jack's face. "Getting revenge for what happened won't accomplish anything other than getting you killed." "Maybe, but I still have to fight. Everyone else gave up, but not me." "He blames me too," Anna realized. Stubborn. "You couldn't give up the fight either," Jack said. "Why else were you at Hakim's palace?" "I tried to live quietly, you know. I would be near my daughter and be at peace. But the longer I live here, the harder it was for me to escape the fact that we are responsible for what happened to this city. We shut down the Anubis project, and Egypt has never recovered." Anna stood up, turning her back to Jack. "People's lives are hard. They're being taken advantage of by parasites like Hakim. How could I let it go on when I knew there was something I could do?" "You're fighting for justice, just like me," Jack said. Anna's eyes narrowed. "Revenge isn't justice." Jack threw his hands up. "We're after the same thing. Why do you think Hakim was at the meeting with Gabriel? He's working for Talon. The rot on this city is going to spread, and it will ruin the world just like it always does. Hakim runs a criminal organization that has strangled Cryo. The police and the government either turned a blind eye, or they're being paid off by him. Food supplies aren't being distributed to people who need them. Medical care is almost impossible to get," Anna said. "Look me in the eye and tell me you can leave without doing anything. Cryo and the world will suffer until we bring them down. You have to see the bigger picture," Jack said heatedly. "Are you hearing yourself? You would have never made this argument before," Anna said disapprovingly. "The way we do things matters." "Times change," Jack said with finality. "Either you're coming with me, or I'm leaving. I've already wasted too much time." "I'm not going," Anna said. For a long moment, Jack stared at her in silence. "A sniper takes the most dangerous threat out first. That was your job." Jack picked up his ruined coat. "If you want to waste time on petty criminals, so be it. I have a war to fight." He stormed out. After Jack left, Anna switched on her computer. Jack had been using it earlier, and the screen was cluttered with articles about Reaper's movements and appearances. Anna wondered who had been supplying Jack with some of this information, but that was a puzzle for another time. She browsed through the reports and remembered the ruined face she had seen behind the mask. "Gabriel, what happened to you?" One of the articles indicated that the casualties in one of the Reaper attacks had suffered the same sort of wounds as Jack. That damn scientist, Anna thought with disgust. The other information offered little insight on the Reaper, providing only a view into Jack's mind. He was following a spiderweb of corporations, government officials, and financial institutions, all hopelessly tangled together through corrupt arteries and shady intermediaries. It was the sort of problem that was never Jack's strong suit. He preferred two sides, concrete facts, and one clear, unequivocal decision. The messy stuff was always Gabriel's arena, not as much as it used to be. Anna considered her options. In her heart, she knew she wanted to stay. Egypt was failing. In a few more years, it was likely that it would fall into chaos, torn apart by profiteers and criminals like Hakim. As the bounty hunter shrieked, she had slowly been making a difference, little by little. If she left, all her work would be undone. But there were other people here, like Pharah. They're not helpless. It doesn't have to be you. That pride again. She looked back at the articles about the vigilante Soldier 76. One caught her attention, a break-in at Lumerico's newest fusion plant. There had been a gunfight in the middle of the market, a number of serious injuries and property damage, all of it attributed to him. But there was also eyewitness testimony from a local girl in Dorado. Even though everyone else thought he was someone to fear, she called him a hero. It doesn't have to be you, but sometimes people need something to believe in. Anna knew what she needed to do. She walked over to the makeshift shelf that held the treasure she had found in the necropolis when she had first arrived. She looked at the feline face of the ancient mask. It was the goddess, Bastet, a guardian. Jack walked through the sleeping city. The cool night air was a pleasant break from the heat of the day. Given the late hour, the streets were quiet, even though he had wandered into the city center. The stalls selling food, scavenged omnic parts, or fabric and textiles had all long since shut down. Curfews weren't imposed, but the city's residents were advised to stay indoors after sundown for their own protection. After coming face to face with Reaper, the dark was a pool of shadows that hid the unknown. Jack had been on the hunt for some time now, gathering information and tracking what leads he had. He had the benefit of being unnoticed, but things had changed. There was no doubt that Talon and its allies knew he was coming for them. He had gotten one good night's sleep since he arrived in Cryo, and it's the first in as long as he could remember. I can't believe she drugged me, Jack thought. He was uneasy now. Staying in one place for too long was risky, especially now that Gabe would be looking for him. He had to move on. Night had crept towards morning, and the full moon was hanging lower in the sky when Jack finally returned. Anna was sitting at the computer as he entered. "Come back for the rest of your things?" she asked without looking up. He walked over to her. "I'll help you capture Hakim. Once that's done, we go after Reaper." "We have to make sure the city is secure," Anna corrected him. "I'll only leave with you after things are settled here. That means not just Hakim, but his followers too. I need to know that the people will be safe." Jack's jaw clenched as he considered the offer. "Then let's go over to his manor and round him and his men up. One quick strike before they have time to prepare." Anna shook her head. "No rushing in. Remember how that went last time?" "It would have been fine if Gabe hadn't shown up," Jack said. Anna arched an eyebrow. Jack sighed. "What's the plan then?" "We start at the bottom and work our way up. Close the net around Hakim. Starve him of his resources, and force him out into the open. We have to expose him and the people that are protecting him. Understood?" Jack sighed, relenting. "You know, I told Gabe they picked the wrong person for the strike commander." "Yes, but you meant him, not me," Anna replied. "It could have been Reinhardt," Jack smirked. "Let's not be crazy now." Ever since the fight at his palace, Hakim had been reticent to return, instead moving between his safe houses in the city. Jack had been able to track down a number of them, and had found one that was most conducive to their plans. He rented an apartment that overlooked it. Anna and Jack hadn't bothered with the niceties. The room was furnished with a couple of beaten-up wooden chairs and a wooden crate. They took turns with the one sleeping bag. After the second day, Anna insisted on bringing a hot plate so she could make tea. Within a week, they had rounded up a number of Hakim's associates, whittling away at his organization. Word spread about someone targeting Hakim's organization. Whoever it was, people agreed they meant to bring Hakim to justice. But after the initial burst, things had slowed down. Hakim went further underground. He was being more careful. There was nothing to do but wait. The boredom wasn't bad for Anna. As a sniper, she had more than her share of patience. And having the freedom to move around, take naps, and even go outside made it more tolerable. Jack was restless, though. She saw the way that he looked out the window, searching the horizon endlessly, and Anna knew that his gaze was fixed on one thing: Gabriel. "Anything?" Jack asked, glancing up. He leaned back in his chair in the way that would make a schoolteacher worried. There was something in his hand. "No sign of Hakim. What are you looking at?" Anna asked. "Oh, just reminiscing about the old days." Jack passed over a small stack of photos. They were well worn, creased in places, and had obviously been Jack's companions for a long time. The top photo was a picture of them with Gabriel, all three looking young and optimistic, though Gabriel already showed signs of the stress of leadership weighing upon him. They had just won a major battle in Rio de Janeiro. "I remember the beach," Anna smiled. "We look so serious in this picture. It's funny." "That's why it's a great photo," Jack laughed. It's good to know that he can still laugh. She turned to the next one and almost dropped the photos in surprise. She had never seen the photo, but she recognized it immediately. Jack looked so much younger. He had just stepped off a military transport for leave. It was the other person in the picture that surprised her, a dark-haired man, dressed in a casual black button-up shirt. Jack's arm was around his shoulder. Vincent. "Vincent? Haven't thought about him in years," Anna said, still keeping a candle lit for him. Jack shook his head. "Nothing like that." "You never looked in on him? You must have been curious. All the surveillance power in the world. I bet Gabe could have put a Blackwatch agent on him if you asked," Anna said. Jack glared back at her. "Okay, touchy subject." Jack laughed. "He got married. They're very happy. I'm happy for him." Anna was unconvinced. In the early days, Jack talked about him often, floating a dream that the war would end quickly, and maybe they would have a chance to return to a normal life. But a normal life was never the reward for people like us. "Vincent deserves a happier life than the one I could give him," Jack sighed. "We both know that I could never put anything above my duty. Everything I fought for was to protect people like him. That's the sacrifice I made." "Relationships don't work out well for us, do they?" Anna said, unconsciously running her thumb over where her wedding ring used to be. "At least you and Gabe managed to have families." The pair lapsed back into silence. Anna glanced out the window to see the familiar figure of Hakim entering the apartment block. "It's him." Anna passed the photos back to Jack, who carefully slid them into the inside pocket of his jacket. "Ready?" Jack asked as he put his mask and targeting visor on, picking up the heavy pulse rifle where he had propped it against the wall. Anna took her own rifle, quite a bit more manageable than Jack's, and slung it over her shoulder. She clipped a few flashbangs to her belt, then retrieved the last item from her pack, the black and gold mask. "You bringing that?" Jack asked. "You inspire me, Jack. Soldier 76 is more than a vigilante. The world knows that name. Your enemies are afraid you'll find them. I don't want Hakeem, Talon, or anyone else to plunge Cryo back into chaos the second I'm gone. I'm putting on a new mask. Not a hunter this time. A protector. The kind of persona I could leave behind to keep the people safe. Bastet." "I thought just my mask was scary," Jack smiled. "Bastet is scarier than an old lady." "Anna, nothing's scarier than an old lady," Jack said. "You would know." 1 week later, Anna and Jack were packing up the Necropolis base. They leave much of Anna's belongings behind, taking only what they needed for the journey ahead. Hakim and his network of criminals had been dismantled. The news had started to report about the movements of the guardian named Bastet, who had captured Hakim and exposed the extent of his crimes. Even the government was forced to act. "What about these?" Jack pointed at the shelf that had the Egyptian artifacts on it. "I could barely manage to carry you, and you want me to bring all of this?" Anna said. "It's well hidden. It will just have to wait here until I can find a proper caretaker." "Fariha?" Jack asked. "You talked to her?" "I left a message," Anna said. "You sure you can leave things like this? It could be a long time before you see her again, if ever." Anna sighed. "She never responded to my first letter." Jack winced. "She'll come around, in time. She loves you. Did you tell Sam anything?" "I will, eventually. Maybe," Anna said. "I made a big enough mess in his life without giving him the news. None of us are good at saying goodbye, are we?" "We're better than Reinhardt anyway. I'm pretty sure his life is one long attempt to avoid saying a goodbye." "How is he?" Anna asked. "That's a long story," Jack said. "But I suppose we'll have time." Anna nodded. "There's something I want to be clear about before we leave, Jack," Anna said. "I'm going with you, but I'm not convinced this is a good idea at all. Talon, Overwatch, Gabriel. I already let all of them go." It hurt. She paused. "When I first came to the Necropolis, most of the artifacts I found here were ruined. I saved what I could, but I had to leave the rest. That's what's most important, Commander." "Don't call me that," Jack groused. "And come on, we need to pay a visit to some old friends." They left the necropolis, sealing the entrance behind them. Long after they had left, the relics of an ancient civilization laid in wait in the darkness of that dusty room. At the center of them was the golden mask bearing the face of a goddess, just as it remained in the hearts of the people of Cairo and the fears of those that would harm them. A mask and a name, Bastet. If you enjoyed this narration, please check out one of my original horror stories I wrote and narrated, or the 1-minute video I did explaining the genre called Ashcan Horror. Also be sure to check out my friend Abysmii's music channel. Some of the music you hear in this video was made by him, and he's an excellent dude.